Alright then, so you've mastered your basic white bread dough, you've done your research, you've spent hours on Instagram looking at amazing bread pictures, and now you're ready to give sourdough a go yourself. So you're going to need a friend, and that friend is this guy, a sourdough starter.
Hello, I'm your friend.
So, what is a sourdough starter? Well, basically it's just wild yeast that is living off of flour and water that you feed every day. So I'm going to show you how to get it going. It's quite easy to get going, it just takes a bit of patience, to be honest, but it is a commitment. Once it's going, you've got to think of it as a pet. You're going to be feeding it and cleaning it out every day. But on the flip side, it is going to reward you with some fantastically flavoured bread. So what I've done over the past week is create starters on different days, so these are all at different stages, and I'll show you what they look like at these stages, what to look out for, and what you need to do to them to get them to the next stage. Day one, you're going to need flour, water, and a glass container. I would recommend, you really do need something bigger than this. Go and get yourself a nice kiln jar, but take the rubber seal off because you do want oxygen to get in there, but something I think that can hold about 1 litre of liquid, that should be fine, because this starter is going to grow, collapse, and you don't want it bubbling out everywhere. If you look on Instagram, you'll see plenty of pictures of sourdough starters bubbling over. It's a good sign, it shows it's vigorous and it's got a lot of power to it, but it's a bit of a pain when it goes everywhere because it is quite sticky, quite difficult to clean up. So get yourself a large jar. I would go for glass because I like to whisk it with a fork. So if you're using plastic, that's just going to scrape it. You might get little flecks of plastic in there. So I recommend glass. Something clear because you want to be able to see your starter growing and when it's collapsing. This is how you're going to learn the cycle of your starter and when it's at its peak, because that is when you want to bake with it. So to get things going, we need our scales, we need our container, and I like to use, to get it going, I like to use 50% rye flour, 50% white bread flour. So in here, I will put 50 grams of the rye. There we go. 50 grams of strong white bread flour. You can use plain white flour. And again, I'd go for something economical because you're going to be feeding this every day, and if you're not baking every day, you're going to be throwing away the same amount every day. So it can get quite expensive. So just get something, I mean these are about £1.20 a bag, something like that. So get something that's not going to cost too much. So that's 100 grams of flour in total, and to that we add 100 grams of water. So this is going to create a liquid starter at 100% hydration. So if you're looking at any recipes, they will sometimes say to use a stiff starter, but this is a liquid starter. So you've got your water, your flour, give it a stir with a fork, get it really well incorporated, like that, and give it a good mix. You want to beat some air into there, because you want things basically to start living. So they need food, which is the flour, water, which is the water, and oxygen, like all living things. Those are the 3 things it needs. So really beat some oxygen into there, some air. Some people recommend you waft it around the room, trying to collect yeast from the air. It's not really necessary, it's a nice idea. If you want to do it, it's not going to do any harm, but you don't need to. So give it a good mix, so you've definitely got no clumps of flour left in there. Scrape down the sides. There we go, let's pop that there. And now you leave it. Put a loose lid on it. If you've got one of these sorts of jars, like I say, make sure the rubber seal's removed. Clip the lid on, pop the lid on. I'm just going to sit that on top like that. And now leave that where you're going to be keeping it for the rest of its life. And leave it for 2 to 3 days. Now, after 2 days, it's going to look like this, which isn't very exciting. It doesn't look like much is happening, and I think a lot of people start panicking at this stage. If it's been 2 or 3 days and you're thinking, oh, it's not bubbling up to the top, don't worry about it, just give it a bit more time. If you have a closer look at this, you can actually see that there are a few bubbles forming. Only 1 or 2, and again from the top you can see a couple. If you give it a smell, it still does just smell like raw wet flour, so there aren't that many signs of fermentation going on in there. And actually I think it smells a bit like sweet corn, to be honest. But if nothing's happening, don't worry about it. Lid back on and give it another day and you'll be amazed, because this one is 1 day later. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this one's about half a centimetre higher, maybe even a centimetre now. So from looking like nothing's happening to this, just 1 day, and now you'll look at this and think, okay, things are starting to happen. This time we've got a few bigger bubbles forming on top, and you can definitely see some bubbles through the glass around the side. The smell's slightly more vinegary now, a bit pickly. It's got that kind of almost composty smell, so not exactly delightful, but I think it shows that things are happening. So if you get to this point and you can see a few bubbles, it's time to give it its first feed. So again, we're going to put 50 grams of rye flour and 50 grams of plain flour, or plain white flour. So there's 50 rye, 50 grams of bread flour, so 100 in total, and again another 100 of water. Let's see, these jars are, that would be on the small side. Get the fork, and again just thoroughly mix that in. There we go. See, it's actually quite foamy. We're releasing some of the air bubbles from what was already in there. Give that a good mix. There we go. Scrape the sides down so they're clear, so you can see what's going on. There we go, nice and stretchy. Lid back on, and now you want to leave that for, I'd say, another at least a couple of days. Again, you're looking for that life, you're looking for bubbles. And when you can see that happening, you'll have moved on to stage 3. And now we can see, compared to the first one, this is the same amount of stuff in there. We're at double the size now. Lots of bubbles. Well, not lots of bubbles on top, you can see a few pockets on top, but it's really the volume that's increased, and you can see the bubbles around the side. It's starting to, actually that smells quite nice, almost a little bit beery maybe. You're getting a slight ale smell with a bit of sort of tangy vinegar. Now, you do see a few recipes suggesting you start your sourdough starter off with apple in there, or raisins in there, or even pineapple in there. But I wouldn't bother with any of that. Those things do create yeast, they have yeast in them, natural yeast, they create yeast, but they're really creating the wrong sort of yeast. Those yeasts from apples, raisins and pineapples eat the sugars from apples, raisins and pineapples. You want to grow as many yeasts that feed on the sugars in flour. So really don't worry about putting anything in there apart from flour and water. And also, if you're losing patience, or right from the start, do not be tempted to put any commercial yeast in there, even a tiny sprinkle. Again, that's a different strain of yeast. It's going to grow in there, but you're just going to make it poolish. That yeast is so powerful, it'll just wipe out all the other yeast, it'll overpower them, it'll eat everything, it'll puff up within a few hours, but you won't have created a sourdough starter. Like I say, you've created a poolish, which you can use for baking, but that's not what we're after. You just want to keep it flour and water. So, it's puffed up nicely. But what we have to do this time, we need to feed it, but we need to remove half of it first. So we'll tip out, you can see, look, it's nice and bubbly. Tip half of that out. So back onto the scale, and again, we're feeding it. So 50 grams of rye flour. There we go. 50 grams of white flour and 100 grams of water. There we go. And again, give it a good mix. Again, beating lots of air in there. You'll notice this time the whole thing feels a little bit more liquid, and that's because of the fermentation. It started breaking down the flour, the gluten, so the whole thing comes a little bit more runny. Scrape down the sides. What I do in my big bowl is once I mixed it, I scrape down the sides with a rubber spatula, really cleans them, and then I can see what's going on in there. So again, lid on, and now you are into a daily feeding program. Keep feeding that daily like that, taking half out and replacing it with 50 grams of rye flour, 50 grams of white flour and 100 grams of water. Do that daily till the end of the week, and what you're then looking for is your starter to look like this. Really full and bubbly. Mine's actually been running for about 4 months now, but after you've been feeding it its daily feed for at least a week, preferably get up to the 2-week mark, you should have a strong, vigorous starter like that. Smells nice, smells a bit ale-y, yeasty, not too sour, slight hint of vinegar, but that is what you want. Now I'll show you how to feed it, but I want to use this. So I've got my flour and water here that's been auto-leasing for a few hours now. There we go. So I want that, look at that, nice and bubbly, light. Get that in there. There we go. Now again, for my routine, I don't leave much in there, sort of quite a scant amount really. There's 2 reasons for this. Firstly, because I'm doing a daily cycle. If I leave too much in there, again it's going to puff up and peak too early. So I leave a small amount in there, and because I'm only feeding it once a day, by the sort of afternoon, evening when it's coming down, that's when it's starting to build up some quite acidic flavours. So by using it all now and only leaving a little amount left, I'm removing those acidic flavours. If I keep feeding from sort of halfway and just adding flour on a daily cycle, probably after a week you're going to find it's very acidic, and that breaks down your dough much quicker and everything starts getting a lot sloppier. So like I said in my tips video, you want to keep it young and vigorous. So I've left literally just what would hold in there, and now I'll add my flour to that. So in here we were doing 100 and 100. Once you're up to speed and it's ticking over, I change that slightly and I do 1/3 rye flour, 2/3 white flour. So I will do 50 grams of rye flour, 100 grams of bread flour. That takes me up to 150 total. And then to that I add 130 of water. I haven't actually worked out what percentage that is, but I reckon we're probably around 80 to 90% hydration. 130, that's actually 135. I don't get too obsessed over it. I just like to keep it slightly under 100. It's probably just a habit I've got into, and I'm getting good results with the bread. Whether it's that, I don't know, but you find when you're making sourdough, every time something good happens to your loaf, you kind of think, oh, what did I do that time? And you'll think, oh, my starter was a slightly lower hydration, or my kitchen was slightly warmer, or it was slightly cooler, and then you try and replicate that each time. So we've got our fresh flour and water in there, mix that up. There we go. And like I say, see, if you're using the rubber spatula, you can get the side of the bowl quite clean. And now I can keep an eye on that. And like I say, by tomorrow morning, that will be up to the top, if not bubbling out. And there we go. So, the key points are, use a glass container so you can see what's happening to your sourdough starter. Don't worry about using anything like pineapple, apple, any fruit, and certainly don't use any commercial yeast, just flour and water. I use the mixture of rye flour and white flour. If you go purely white flour, you're going to find it takes a lot longer to get going. It is quite hard to get a pure white starter working. Rye flour is like a little boost really. It just really creates a lot more yeast in there, a lot more activity. So that's why I do the 50-50 rye and white. Wholemeal would do the same, but I find wholemeal ends up getting a bit sloppy again. It produces a lot of fermentation, and like I said, I'm trying to get this daily cycle. But you'll need to learn the cycle of your sourdough. So once you're up to 2 weeks, then just keep watching it a bit. See how long it takes to peak and come down again. You're looking for a nice dome on top. Once that dome on top starts collapsing in the middle, that means it's reached its peak and now it's falling. You want to have baked just before that or at that peak. You can once it starts falling, but when you're starting out, you want to get it on the way up. If it's coming down, that's when you start to get more sour flavours in your loaf. The dough starts to get a little bit more fluid, a bit more liquid, like I say. So rye flour and white flour, I keep mine at 90%-ish hydration, but certainly a liquid starter is generally 100% hydration, and whatever recipes you're following, if they say a liquid starter, no doubt they mean 100%, so it's probably quite good to keep it at 100% so you can follow those recipes. If you're going for a daily cycle, just feed a very small amount in there, don't leave 20-30% in there. This is probably 5-10%, and that's it. I keep mine out of the fridge. Like I said, I keep it on top of the fridge on this daily cycle, but if you're only going to be making sourdough maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month, you can keep it in the fridge, but you just have to bring it back up to speed basically a couple of days before you're going to bake. So I used to keep it in the fridge on a weekly cycle, but I put it in the fridge on a Sunday evening, and if I wanted to bake the following weekend, I'd need to get it out on Wednesday, feed it Wednesday evening, feed it Thursday, and then give it a double feed Friday ready for the weekend. So in the end, it was only in the fridge for like Monday and Tuesday, so it just wasn't worth it. I now keep it out the fridge all the time. But if you're not going to be baking at least weekly, it might be advisable to keep it in the fridge, but just make sure you get it going again at least 2 days before you're going to bake. And that pretty much covers it. I hope that's been helpful and has answered all your sourdough starter questions. If it hasn't and you've got more questions, leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. If I can't, I'll point you in the direction of someone who can. There's a fantastic community of bakers out there on Instagram, YouTube, so any problems, just ask and someone is bound to be able to give me some advice. My next video will hopefully be on how to use this lovely, vigorous starter to make your first loaf of sourdough bread. So if you don't want to miss that, please hit the subscribe button. The channel is growing, which is great. So yeah, hit the subscribe button and join me with your bubbly starter and we will make some sourdough.